are talking Await the Dawn. This one is directed by, wait for it, Pablo Macho Massonet IV. And he also wrote this movie. I probably butchered that name, but there you go. It's actually got a pretty good cast of recognisable character actors, including Dee Wallace, who's kind of our out of the named actors, has the most to do. Small roles for Bruce Davidson, Courtney Gaines and Vernon Wells. And I gotta be honest with you, when I was watching this film, I was reminded of, it's kind of like a mix between Evil Dead, Dusk Till Dawn and Night of the Demons. If you could have squished those three movies together, you know, you have a lot lower budget, then this kind of movie feels like it's a combination of those three. I've seen a lot of negativity about this film in some of the kind of the reviews, but I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I actually think this is quite a strong film for those of you who kind of like 80s style horror movies, because it did remind me a lot of those style films. Although this movie is set in a modern era and is not necessarily trying to be retro, some of the kind of the practical effects and the kind of like the setup and stuff just reminded me of those films quite a lot. But what is the setup, you're asking? So this focuses on a kind of caravan full of people. I think you call it a Winnebago in America. There's kind of like people carrier ultimately of this family and kind of a couple of their friends, as the kind of like the younger daughter has got a drug problem and she's being sort of driven to rehab. Dee Wallace plays the mother. Along the way, they're hijacked by this guy who wants them to kind of get out of Dodge, wants them to kind of get away. And initially, he seems like the kind of like the enemy, but there is a demonic force, it seems, that is in the form of this young girl that is far more dangerous and seems to be stalking this caravan. And ends up when this caravan gets stuck in the middle of the woods, they have to fight for their survival. So, first of all, let's talk about what worked. As I said, I think this movie has somewhat of an 80s vibe. The kind of the pacing of the film, certainly the effects, the kind of like the monster effects here, do seem like that. The kind of the characters kind of seem somewhat out the kind of the 80s. And obviously you've got, you know, actresses like Dee Wallace, Vernon Wells, who of course were at their heyday in the kind of the 80s. As I say, Dee Wallace is the one, out of all the kind of the named actors at least, she's the only one that really has any type of substantial role, but she's excellent in the movie. I thought she was really good as this kind of mother who is having to deal with supernatural stuff, and the fact that her daughter is, you know, struggling with drugs. And there's a scene, I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's a scene where someone dies, shall we say, and I just thought Dee Wallace's reaction to it was fantastic. So I really like Dee Wallace in the movie. I have to talk about the effects, and I thought the effects here were, with the exception of one, which we're going to put a pin in that, is one special effect which I thought was a lot different. But the practical kind of makeup on the kind of like the possessed people, the kind of the demons and things like this, was pretty good. There are some particularly fun gore shots in this movie. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there are some really fun sequences which are pretty bloody, but they're kind of done with that sort of like, as I say, Evil Dead style, kind of like tongue-in-cheek style gore. So it's not as if you're watching, you know, graphic, realistic depictions of people's heads getting torn off and things like that. It's kind of like that silly kind of fun gore, but I think it's that perfect level where horror fans will enjoy the kind of the OTT gory effects and things like that. So it's not something that's going to make you squeamish, but you'll just enjoy the kind of the fun kind of practical effects as well. I think the idea of the actual antagonist itself is an interesting one, and it kind of, it's not quite as obvious as it sounds in regards to where this kind of entity had come from and stuff like that, and even kind of reminds you of something like the Stephen King's The Mist and things like that. There's kind of elements of that in this movie as well. What doesn't work? Okay, I gotta be honest with you, I think some of the acting from the lesser known cast is not up to par with the likes of Dee Wallace. Some of the moments here, and it's not everyone all of the time, but there are some performances here, and I'm not gonna point them out, that are somewhat stilted, let me just put it like that. You know when you see it, but there are some acting here that is like, oh my god, that is a little bit like nails on chalkboard at times. I think the actual plot doesn't make a huge amount of sense, if we're being completely honest. It's one of those movies where you do have to somewhat switch your brain off and kind of think about it, or don't think about it even. It just seems silly at times, and you wonder why certain kind of character motivations are at a certain point. And then the movie also seems to contradict itself. It sets up certain rules and then somewhat contradicts itself to a certain degree. I've mentioned I like the effects. However, the end monster is terrible. And it's just like, the effects were so good to this point, and then we have this kind of like the reveal of this kind of like the end creature, and it's like, oh my god, and it just looks terrible. And I actually think the actual end sequence was a little weak as well. But overall, I did enjoy this movie. I do think you can watch this along with films like Night of the Demons, that are fun, kind of like gooey horror movies that, you know, are fun but maybe not kind of considered high art. I think this is a good comparative movie to kind of those type of things. It's certainly not going to be a classic, but I got to say, I think the majority of people will certainly like these fun, gory and gooey set pieces that are peppered throughout the movie, and an interesting antagonist, not entirely successful, I will say, but there you go. I'm not going to say too much about the antagonist, but nonetheless, I think there are elements here that work and elements that don't. But overall, for me, I actually did enjoy this movie, so I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.